No one would have believed, in the last years of the 19th year hundred, that earthling business was being watched keenly and closely by smarts greater than man's and yet as death-shieldy as his own. That as men busied themselves about their business they were shruttened and learned, mayhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a small seer might shrutten the fleeting wights that swarm and manifold in a drop of water. With endless carelessness, men went to and fro over this earth about their little business, unbothered in their sickness of their cozy rich over and timber. It is likely that the small wights and the small seer do the same. No one gave a thought to the older worlds of Rodder as sources of earthling plea, or thought of them only to snub the understanding of life upon them as hopeless or unlikely. It is odd to recall some of the mindly ones of those gone days. At most, earthly men reckoned there might be other men upon Ty, mayhaps lower to themselves and ready to welcome a sendling undertaking. Yet, across the Yeep of Rodder, minds that are to our minds as ours are to those of the deers that Forwarth, Anyats, Wildgate, and vast and unmidtherland maved at this earth with ondy eyes, and slowly and couthly drew their plots against us. And early in the 20th year hundred came the Great Undwimmerly. The Tungal Ty, I uneath admind the reader, umwerves about the sun at a middling fall of 140,000 miles, and the light and heat it fangs from the sun is barely half of that fanged by this world. It must be, if the Anapan Erecking has any truth, older than our world, and long before this earth halted to be molten, life upon its bead must have begun its course. The fact that it is uneath 1/7 of the warmth of the earth must have hastened its cooling to the weather at which life could begin. It has lift and water, and all that is needed for the full term of heart and being. Yet so idle is man, and so blinded by his idle-walder, that no writer up to the swift end of the 19th year hundred outspoke any understanding that smart life might have unfolded there far, or indeed at all, beyond its earthly layer. Nor was it broadly understood that since Ty is older than our earth, with uneath a farthing of the glib acre, and further from the sun, it needfully follows that it is not only far from life's beginning, but nearer its end. The worldly cooling that must some day overtake our Tungal has already gone far indeed with our neighbour. Its rinnenly ship is a starly round, but we now know that even in its middle wilderness, the midday weather barely nears that of our coldest winter. Its lift is much more weakened than ours. Its seas have shrunk until they shroud but a third of its bead, and as its slow year-tides wend, Ettinish snowcaps gather and melt about either pole, and sometimes overwhelm its meathful acres. That last step of Meath, which to us is still awesomely far-flung, has become an onward-day bugbear for the Warren of the Ty. The forthright thringing of need has brightened their Anyats, biggened their mights, and hardened their hearts. And looking across Rodder, with tools and wits such as we have uneath dreamed of, they see at its nearest fall, only 35,000 of miles sunward of them, a morning star of hope, our warmer Tungal, green with bleed and grey with water, with a cloudy lift shell wordsnotter of bearing, with glimpses through its drifting cloud wisps of broad stretches of the Folk land and narrow, fleet-crowded seas. And we men, the wights who bowed this earth, must be to them at least as fremd and lonely as are the monkeys and lemurs to us. The Anyetan side of man already andets that life is an unending struggle for being, and it would seem that this too is the belief of the minds upon Ty. Their world is far gone in its cooling, and this world is still crowded with life, but crowded only with what they mathen as lower deer. To take warfare sunward Indeed, is there only at rest from the rack that knee after knee creeps upon them. And before we deem of them too harshly, we must murmur what ruthless and utter rack our own breed has wrought, not only upon deer, such as the swindled bison and the dodo, but upon its own lower breeds. The Tasmanians, notwithstanding their earthling likeness, were wholly swept out of being in a Wye of outrooting undertaken by Europish incomers, in the room of 50 years. Are we such bodders of middles as to bemoan if the tilings warred in the same Sid? The tilings seem to have reckoned their fall with amazing low keenness. Their rhymecraftal learning is subtly far in ornamentless of ours, and to have ferried out their diets with a well near flawless onehood. Had our tools motted it, we might have seen the gathering ado far back in the 19th year-hundred. Men like Schiaparelli watched the red tungle. It is odd, by the by, that for the endless year-hundreds, Ty has been the star of Wye, but trucked to erect the waving looks of markings they drafted so well. All that time, the tilings must have been getting ready. Amid the whipsaw of the 1894, a great light was seen on the enlightened deal of the sheave. First, at Lick Starwatch, then by Perrotin of Nice, and then by other watchers. Engelkeen readers heard of it first in the writ of kind dated Weedmonth 2nd. I am willing to think that the luck may have been the casting of the Ettinish gun, the wide gale pits sunk into their tungle from which their shots were fired at us. Selkirk markings, as yet unerect, were seen near the stow of that outbreak amid the next two whipsaws. The storm burst upon us 6 years ago now. As Ty neared Whipsaw, Lavelle of Java set the wires of the Rodolori Rixel biving with the amazing smarts of an Ettinish outbreak of white-hot mist upon the tungle. It had happened towards the midnight of the 12th, and the breath-glass to which he had once returned betokened a heap of lating mist, mainly water stuff, stirring with an Ettinish speed towards this earth. This throw of fire had become unseen about a farthing past 12. He bemetted it to an Ettinish puff of late, snarled and hastily squirted out of the tungle, as lating mist rushes out of a gun. A one lepidly becoming quid it proved. Yet the next day, there was nothing of this in the bookfells, but a little note in the Daily Telegraph, and the world went in lawless of one of the gravest pleas that ever threatened the earthling breed. I might not have heard the bursting at all had I not met Ogilvy, the well-known tungler at Ottershaw. He was ultimately thrilled at the news, and in the ornatedness of his feelings beckoned me up to take a turn with him that night in a shrutting of the red tungle. Notwithstanding all that has happened since, I still remember that watch swift sundrily, the black and the wisp star watch, the shadowed blowkern throwing a nesh glow upon the floor in the hern, the steady ticking of the daimial work of the spurry glass, the little slit in the roof, a long warp heaviness with the star dust streaked across it. Ogilvy stirred about, unseen but a list. Looking through the spurry glass, one saw a ring of deep hewn, and the little sin-welt tungle swimming in the field. It seemed such a little thing, so bright and small and still, wanly marked with an overthwart stripes and slightly flattened from the flawless sin-welt. But so little it was, so silvery warm, a pin's head of light. It was as if it shook a little, but soothly. This was the spurry glass shaking with the ado of the daimial work that kept the tungle in sight. I watched the little star seem to grow stourer and smaller, and to sty and ebb. But that was one fold my eye was tired. 40,000 of miles it was from us, more than 40,000 of miles of lair. Few folks understand the awkwardness of emptiness in which the dust of the Antimber Alkin swims. Near it in the field, I remember, were 3 orbs of light, 3 fallenly stars endlessly far flung, and all around it was the unfathomably darkness of the empty Rodder. You know how that blackness looks on a frosty starlit night? In a sporoglass it seems far nearer, and unseen to me because it was so far flung and small, flying swiftly and steadily towards me across that awesome fall, drawing nearer every 60 Brighton miles by so many thousands of miles, came the thing they were sending us. The thing that was to bring so much struggle and qualm and death to the earth. I never dreamed of it then as I watched. No one on earth dreamed of that unblundering streel. That night too, there was another throwing out of mist from the far tungle. I saw it, a reddish flash at the edge, the slightest knob of the outline, just as the tide meter struck midnight. And at that, I told Ogilvy, and he took my place. The night was warm, and I was thirsty, and I went, stretching my legs clumsily, and feeling my way in the darkness to the little table where the drain stood, while Ogilvy bellowed at the streamer of mist that came out towards us. That night, another unseen streel started on its way to the earth from Ty, just a Brighton while or so under 24 downs after the first one. I remember how I sat on the table there in the blackness, with patches of green and base swimming before my eyes. I wish I had a light to smoke by, little inkling of the meaning of the wee gleam I had seen, and all that it would inwardly bring me. Ogilvy watched till 1 and then gave it up, and we lit the blowcorn and walked over to his house. Down below in the darkness were Ottershaw and Chertsey, and all their hundreds of folk sleeping in Frith. He was full of guesses that night about the fettle of Ty, and scoffed at the foul understanding of its having Warren who were beaconing us. His understanding was that shooting stars might be falling in a heavy shower upon the tungle, or that an Ettinish fire-barrowy blast was in fourth gang. He ordered to me how unlikely it was that Tharmy unfolding had taken the same path in the two Thedinus tungles. Perhaps against anything manlike on Ty are 1,000 to 1,000 to 1. He said. Hundreds of watchers saw the lake that night, and the night after, about midnight, and again the night or after, and so for 10 nights, a late each night. Why the shots halted after the 10th, no one on earth has foundered to a wreck. It may be the mists of the firing sate the tilings' unscrapness. Thick clouds of smoke or dust, seenly through a mighty sporoglass on earth as little grey waving patches, spread through the subtleness of the tungle's lift shell and hid its more couth marks. Even the daily bookfells woke up to the upstairs at last, and full couth notes tattooed here, there, and everywhere, and at the fire barrows upon Ty. The earnest, funny Tydic punch, I remember, made a happy note of it in the hourliness drawing, and all uninkled those streels the tilings have fired upon us drew earthward, rushing now at a speed many miles a Brighton while through the empty deepness of Rhodder, stound by stound, and day by day, nearer and nearer. It seems to me now almost awesomely wonderful that, with that swift weird hanging over us, men could go about their small-minded limpins as they did. I remember how blissful Markham was at sickering a new light build of the tungle for the meted bookfell he had dieted in those days. Folk in these latter times uneath understand the night and undertaking of our 19th year 100 bookfells. For my own part, I was much bowed in learning to ride a two-wheel, and busy upon a row of bookfells, speaking the unfoldings of rightwise understanding as a moan forthganged. One night, the first streel could then uneath have been 10,000 miles away. I went for a walk with my wife. It was Starlight, and I erected signs of the 12 tokens to her, and ordered out Ty, a bright dot of light creeping uprightward, towards which so many sporoglasses were ordered. It was a warm night. Coming home, a host of wayfarers from Chertsey or Isleworth byfared us singing and playing Dream. There were lights in the upper windows of the houses as the folks went to bed. From the railway stead in the fall came the sound of shunting tugwains, ringing and rumbling, softened almost to a swin by the fall. My wife ordered out to me the brightness of the red, green and yellow beacon lights hanging in a framework against the sky. It seemed so sound and still. The Wye of the Worlds is an original English translation by Arcticanomaly of the War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. If you've enjoyed this translation, please like the video and subscribe to be notified of more content focused on the craft of writing and English storytelling. Also, don't forget to check out the playlist on your screen now for more chapters of the Wye of the Worlds when they're available. And last but not least, leave a comment below letting me know what your favourite English words were featured in this chapter, or if you'd like to see more English stories.